Okay, today we're going to be discussing aggregate demand, and we'll start with a representation of the circular flow. Now, as we all know, there are three inputs into firms that go into the circular flow. First up, we have investment on capital. We then have government spending, for example, on welfare benefits. And then finally, we have exports, which are goods sold abroad. The money then comes in to domestic firms. Money flows from firms to households by way of income. This can be from profits, wages, shares, and many other forms of loans. Income flows from households to firms by way of consumer spending, for example, spending on a packet of crisps. There are leakages from households in the form of taxation, which goes towards government and can help fund government spending. Also, in the form of imports, which are goods bought from abroad. The money flows outside of the country and to other producers. The final leakage is savings, not because they actually leave the economy, but because they are kept and not used in consumption. Just stop there. But what we actually need to think about is what AD really is. Simply put, aggregate demand is the total demand for all goods and services within the economy. Now we have a formula for aggregate demand: consumption spending, which we've already seen before, the three injections, minus imports. Imports subtract from the total of AD because that is goods coming in and the money flowing out. So the demand for goods and services is not in the economy, but rather out of the economy for imports. This is often bracketed as the balance of trade. The UK regularly runs a large deficit in this part of aggregate demand. The UK economy tends to focus more towards government spending and relies heavily on consumption, two parts that have been very heavily damaged by the current economic climate, especially with the fiscal deficit. We now need to look at aggregate demand in a graphical context. Aggregate demand is represented by a downward sloping curve. So as we see, at higher price levels, less is demanded and henceforth GDP of the country's economy falls. It is the opposite. If CPI is low, then GDP will be higher. For this example, we'll use an arbitrary short-run aggregate supply. So this is our current equilibrium. We have GDP at Y1 and we have CPI at P1. If aggregate demand were to increase, say from a decrease in taxes or an increase in government expenditure, then we would see a rise in GDP. However, we would also see a rise in the average price level. Thus, this is called demand pull inflation, and it's important that countries, when they try to stimulate AD in order to boost the economy, don't go overboard and increase their price index so much that it erodes growth and confidence in the economy. We now need to examine aggregate demand in a Keynesian context. Here we're looking at the effect of a multiplier, and also we'll be talking about hyperinflation. So let's start off with this first aggregate demand curve here. The economy is operating well below its full capacity, so the government might decide to step in to try and boost AD so income can be boosted right up to its full employment level. To do this, the government will likely increase government expenditure, thus increasing AD. Now, this resultant increase in GDP should result in an increase in consumer confidence, which leads them to actually spend more, which actually further increases AD. Thus it creates a virtuous cycle, with every single step-by-step increase in income, therefore aggregate demand should increase more. The danger with this is this virtuous cycle could turn very ugly if aggregate demand increases to such a level that rather than getting extra wealth, instead all you're creating is mass hyperinflation. And this is the danger that can confront governments if they spend too much in too short a time period, because they end up with massive inflation from which they cannot easily recover but also with very little GDP growth and no long-run growth to show for it.